It's wonderful to be here, and I want to congratulate everyone here at Iceland who has worked to make this event take place and to set up this network and this collaboration. I'm going to make a few introductory remarks to set the tone, and then we'll introduce each of the participants in order. Planetary history. The planet is undergoing the greatest transformation since its emergence in the last ice age 12,000 years ago. That change in climate then allowed for the rise of agriculture and the formation of cities. The benign period of climate known as the Holocene has supported the current human population of just over 7 billion people. Now, each generation has a set of tasks before it. The generation before mine found ways to reduce infectious disease and reduce human misery, and it was accomplished by that generation. The cleaning of air and water in the developed world and halting the use of ozone-depleting chemicals was the accomplishment of my generation, but there is unfinished business. Saving the climate, our oceans, and biodiversity by halting the release of heat-trapping gases into the atmosphere from fossil fuels and land use changes falls to you, the younger generation. Let's just take a look at this planetary history. This is the temperature going back to the year 1000, about the time that Iceland was founded by Vikings. And you can see it goes up and it goes down, and it keeps going. And then at the very end, there's this dramatic rise in temperature. That's what we have done through our release of gases into the atmosphere. If we go back for earlier history, 800,000 years. I don't even know if that's history. It's only history if it's human, and humans have only been here for 200,000 years. So this is prehistory on here as well. You can see that it has gone up and down, temperature has gone up and down, and carbon dioxide has gone up and down pretty much in sync with that. That's the result of planetary motions long before we were here. Notice the green line on the very right-hand side. That line, which ends actually below where we are now, we're actually at 400 parts per million, is the amount of carbon dioxide we have in the atmosphere today. But has the climate changed? Well, according to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, September 2014 was the warmest global September since records began in 1880. It was the 38th consecutive September with a global temperature above the 20th century average. And that means that anyone who was born after 1976 has never experienced a September that was cooler than the average September of the 20th century. It just keeps going up. And of course, as you know, the ice keeps melting. It's pretty clear dramatic things have happened in recent years in terms of the loss of Arctic sea ice. This is just showing in the year 2012, which is the most dramatic, when about half of the Arctic sea ice that would have been there during the average from 1979 to 2000 disappeared. And in 2009, the first two ships actually made the transit through the Arctic. And that really whetted everyone's appetite to go and do Arctic drilling. There's oil and gas, as you just heard from the previous speaker. There is a lot of it. However, this morning, or today, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the last part of its fifth assessment report, the so-called synthesis report. And let me just take a couple of quotations from it. The synthesis report offers conclusive scientific evidence that human activities continue to cause unprecedented changes in the Earth's climate, with the conclusion that we need to elevate the level of political commitment and action if we are to avoid the impacts of climate change. I might also add the World Bank has published 3 reports now saying that every bit of development that the World Bank has financed since the end of the Second World War when it was founded will be wiped out if the temperatures rise by 4 degrees Celsius, which is the trajectory we're actually on. So the executive director of UNEP, Achim Steiner, is quoted about the latest report saying, "The latest IPCC report has provided us with not only the latest climate science and data, but also with a better understanding of the best options for action. The IPCC thus represents the foundation and a compass for the negotiations in Lima in next month and in Paris in 2015. So basically the findings are we can still limit global warming to 2 degrees C, and thus avert the worst consequences for our children and future generations. That's a direct quote from the report. However, to avoid exceeding that, the remaining budget of carbon dioxide is 900 billion tons. And if annual emissions today are about 30 billion tons, so we have 30 years at current emission rates. As you saw in the previous talk, there is a lot more out there than that. 2 years ago, some colleagues and I took a look at these data, and we came up with this situation. We estimated not 900, but 1,050 billion tons. That's actually 3 years ago, so it's fairly close to these numbers. But look at how much oil we know, the blue line, how much gas we know we have, how much coal we know we have. We can only do what's in that bottom bar and stay within 2 degrees. So the question is whether we will actually need all that oil or should use all that oil. There have been studies that suggest it's technologically feasible to shift from fossil fuels, there on the left, the black areas, to a variety of renewables sometime in the next, by 2050 or so. This is an interesting study, and there's no technological barrier. There are basically implementation barriers. But people are not waiting. This new skyscraper in Manhattan is considered the world's most sustainable commercial building. It was completed in 2013. Extraordinary low energy use, very little use of fossil fuels in any way. My own home, 10 years ago, my wife and I decided we wanted to have a fossil fuel-free home. Is that possible in New England, where the winter temperatures get down to -10 Celsius? And the answer is yes, it's possible, and we've been doing it since 2007 when we moved in. And wanting to go one step further, added a few solar panels last year, bought a plug-in hybrid car, and I can now drive, at least in town, on solar electricity. Truly carbon-free. We're connected to the grid, and I actually purchase renewably generated when I'm buying from the grid, and I sell to the grid, and I produce more than I use. But that's not the only way. Volkswagen last year came out with this vehicle that can go 110 kilometers on a single liter of fuel. So you don't have to go all electric. You can actually go this way. Or if you want, you can get some other fancy electric vehicle. So here are 2 views and 1 conclusion. An altered climate is expected to reduce GDP of the world by 5 to 25% each year, according to Nicholas Stern. And the co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says it doesn't cost the Earth to save the planet. He's also an economist. But it can be done. Since the 2011 IPCC report on renewable energy that I worked on, we've more than doubled the amount of wind and solar in the world, in China, the US, and Europe. Energy efficiency gains have made great strides. China is implementing carbon prices in addition to Europe, Northeast US states, Quebec, British Columbia, and California. And the current generation of rising stars will write the next chapter of planetary history. The future of human society will be determined on how society treats the planet, and the current generation of rising stars has already shown that they can break out of some of the destructive development patterns. So we of the passing generation, I want to assure you, will do what we can to help. Thank you.